Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear friends. I'm Father Christian Sova, Director of the Chapel for You, and you are most welcome to the chapel tonight. To this symbolic place, multicultural, ecumenical, interconvictional, to seek unity in diversity, you know these words. To pray and celebrate together, but not only, also to reflect and share on important European issues. Welcome to the chapel, whose honorary president is Mr. Herman Van Rompuy, and welcome in the period when we still celebrate the 20th anniversary of the chapel in service of European milieux. There was much more to the creation of the European Union than the simple economic project. It should contribute to reconciliation, to peace, and inspire solidarity. It was Robert Schumann's idea that Europe cannot remain only technical. It needs a soul, and this was recalled later several times, among others by the President Jacques Delors, last year by the President Ursula von der Leyen, in her State of the Union address in September 2021. For me personally, the history of the European Union, 27 countries so different together, is a big success story, even after Brexit, and even despite all the problems and challenges we know, economy, refugees, environment, COVID. Every problem from one side questions the assumptions upon which the European Union was founded, but from the other side helps us or challenges us to rediscover our initial values and to move forward. So, given the latest challenge, the Russia's war in Ukraine, what we can do as individuals and as community? Can this situation, for example, motivate us to rethink our lifestyle, to give up some of our comfort to be more solidary with Ukrainian people? What the European Union is doing and how far does the European solidarity can go? Finally, what can be the role of churches and faith-based organizations? We hope to discuss some of these questions tonight. So I would like to welcome very warmly among us our distinguished guests, Mr. Othmar, the first Vice President of the European Parliament, and Mr. Margaritis, SCHINAS, Vice President of the European Commission. Thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. Mr. Karas is responsible, among others, for relations with national parliaments, parliamentary democracy issues, implementation of the Conference of the Future of Europe's conclusions, and for information policy and press. Mr. SCHINAS is in charge of promoting our European way of life, which is built, as we read, around solidarity, peace, and security. He is also responsible, among others, for a coordination of works on a new pact on migration and asylum, and for other migration and security issues. And both of speakers are responsible from the side of the European Parliament and European Commission for a dialogue with churches, religious associations, and non-confessional organizations. So one more reason to have you tonight among us. And speaking about churches, I would like to most welcome our moderator, Reverend Sarah Jane King. A pastor from the Anglican Chaplaincy in Leuven and a good friend of the chapel, tonight with us à titre privé, and I'm sure that with her significant European experience and her ecumenical sensibility, it will be a great exchange tonight. And just a last word, preparing this event, we didn't want another formal and boring European conference. This is why we ask our speakers to shorten their initial speeches, to have more time for lively sharing with the moderator and the questions, answers from the audience. So, Reverend Sarah Jane, dear guests, the floor is yours, and I wish you all an inspiring.
Well, let me add my welcome to that of Christian. You are all very welcome to this evening's conference. It's really great to be able to gather together in person rather than online. And it's a special pleasure for me to be back here at the chapel. It's a special place for me, and I know for many of you who are gathered here this evening. A place of encounter and a place of dialogue, one with another. I'd also like to add my thanks to those of Christian, to our speakers, for giving up their time this evening. We know how busy you are, and we're grateful to you. We're really grateful to you for being with us this evening. There was an English poet of the First World War, Wilfred Owen. His writing did not glorify military campaigns with triumphalist language. He said, "My subject is war and the pity of war." After that terrible war, and after the terrible war that followed it, Europe said, "Never again, no more war." And of that, the European community was born, now the European Union. And yet, war has returned to the continent of Europe, right on the EU's doorstep. And so our subject this evening is war and the pity of war, but also what we as Europeans and our European Union are doing in response. The format of the evening will be as follows. Each of our distinguished speakers will say a few words, and then we will have a conversation, the three of us, in which you are invited to listen in, be flies on the wall, as it were, and to start to think of your own questions that you would like to pose to our distinguished guests this evening. We will then open the floor for questions, and as Christine said, we're looking forward to a lively, engaging and entertaining debate, but one that is also perhaps thought-provoking, that leaves us with something to take away, something to ponder. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor to Vice President Karas, first Vice President of the European Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome him, please?
Excellencies, Honorable Vice President SCHINAS, Honorable Father Sova, dear Reverend Jane King, ladies and gentlemen, happy birthday to the Chapel for Europe, and a very warm welcome on behalf of the European Parliament. It is both a pleasure and an honor to be with you this evening. Special thanks to the Chapel for organizing this event. The European spirit of this church is very much needed during these challenging times. Everything, also your anniversary, is currently overshadowed by Russia's war against Ukraine. In this context, your event is a good occasion to look back into the past and ahead into the future. Just like the former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl once said, if we don't know the past, we cannot understand the present, and we will not be able to create our future. Looking back, exactly 82 years ago, on 17th May 1940, German forces marched into Brussels and occupied. The European project evolved as the key lesson of the wars in Europe. To secure peace, we have first established an economic project for Europe's prosperity, the European Community. Then, gradually, rights and values emerged and developed. In the treaties, in case law, in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and even more in the aspirations of Europe's citizens. With the foundation of the European Union, such aggression has become unthinkable to us on European soil. Still, on 24th February this year, Russia started its fully fledged invasion of Ukraine. The attack on sovereign democracy and displacement of people, the torture and the executions seem like a relic of another time, and yet here they are again. This war is also a war against liberal parliamentary democracy, against our rights and values, against us, against freedom and human rights. We, the European Union, its citizens and partners, we must stand together against the aggressor and on the side of our values. We must respond with unity and resolve. This is not the time for political games, blockades, or blackmail. We must support Ukraine with everything the country needs. And we must sanction Russia with everything in our power. During these challenging times, the solidarity, help and action of the people, churches and philosophical organizations have a key role to play. Some are putting themselves at the highest risk, which deserves our respect and support. We all feel it. Our world is in upheaval and change. The war, the pandemic, the climate crisis, the humanitarian, social and economic consequences, paired with the threats to the rule of law, nationalism and populism. Nobody can manage these challenges alone. Only united, we will stand before history, both internally and externally. Looking forward, we have recently concluded the conference on the future of Europe, with 325 ambitious proposals in 49 different chapters for developing our union further. With a common fundamental right, our Charter of Fundamental Right, our values, and so on. These proposals have one thing in common. They ask for more cooperation between the citizens of Europe. The European Union has to unite us. Our values has to unite us. Our common law has to unite us. They say, the citizens, yes to the abolition of the undemocratic traitors. Yes to the European Parliament's right to initiate legislation. Yes to energy, health, social security and defense union. Yes to European citizenship and transnational lists for the next EU elections. We want to democratize the European Union. We have to make the European Union more efficient, and we have to achieve our common goal to create the understanding as a common continent. The outcome of the Conference of the Future of Europe is tailwind for moving the European project forward. Now it is about implementation, and we need all of you to implement our common goals. We must be willing to make the future our future. Ladies and gentlemen, since its inauguration, the Chapel for Europe has been a place for reflection, meditation and dialogue, a symbol of unity and a house of prayer. Especially now, the role of the chapel is ever more important. In this spirit, let me say a big thank you on behalf of the European Parliament for your valuable work. I look forward to an interesting discussion, and I wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President Karas, for that introduction and, in a sense, for setting this challenge that we face at the moment in Europe in that broader context of the other political challenges and also Europe's ambitions for its own future. I'd now like to give the floor to Vice President SCHINAS to share his thoughts from his perspective as Vice President of the European Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome him, please?
Thank you, Reverend. Excellencies, brothers and sisters. Let me first tell you how delighted I am to be back to this chapel and warmly congratulate you on the 20th anniversary of the Chapel for Europe. I have very strong, vivid memories of prayer of colleagues from all institutions in the chapel in the aftermath of 9/11, where we all gathered, first speechless and then praying for a world to become better. I'm not sure that our prayers were heard, but we still praying. In these dark times, I think it's vitally important that we have a multicultural and ecumenical space welcoming Christians, Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, Anglicans and Anglicans together for worship, celebration of joint events, conferences, but also, as Othmar just said, it's a place of reflection, exchange and support for all those who are close to the institutions. I praise your mission, which is based on the ethical values inspired by the gospel and the search for the common good. Now, more than ever, I think it is really important to have spaces like the Chapel for Europe for reflection, encounter and dialogue. Because let us not forget that Christianity, above all, above everything, is love. And love is and will always be stronger than the bombs and the cannons. In these dramatic developments that we are witnessing since the 24th of February, there is one thing that is becoming, I think, very clear, that this war is not about security. It's about democracy, freedom and values. This is happening because the model of society we stand for, the European way of life, is now widely admired. It's spreading across the continent as a society that people want to live in. And something that was the privilege of few Western states in the 60s and was then expanded to the Mediterranean South under the dictatorships, and then on the ruins of the Berlin Wall created a huge democratic arrow that starts from the Baltics and goes all the way through Central Europe, Eastern Europe, to Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia. This model of society, the triumph of democracy, the triumph of our way of life, is considered as a threat by authoritarian leaders who do not want to see this model approaching them. So since this very first day of this illegal, unprecedented, and unjustified act of aggression, I think the Russian leadership underestimated our unity, our determination, our resolve, and the speed of our common action. We are all deeply alarmed across the European Union, but beyond the borders of the European Union. In the civilized world, we are all appalled by the humanitarian situation and the many war crimes that are now being documented. We strongly condemn the blatant, violent, widespread violations of international humanitarian law, human rights, the shelling of residential buildings, maternities, hospitals, monasteries, and other critical civilian infrastructure that blocks the delivery of life-saving aid, besieged cities. All this must stop immediately. And should not only stop, all this should also be punished. There will be no credible settlement in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine without the perpetrators of these horrendous crimes being punished as they deserve. The EU, together with our member states from the very first moment, we stood by Ukraine. We're the biggest donor of humanitarian and development assistance to this country. We're jointly mobilizing around 1 billion euros in humanitarian assistance, and during the pledging conference standing up with Ukraine that took place in Warsaw last month, we also announced another 1 billion support package for Ukraine. And we have also enacted 5 deep, intensive, unprecedented packages of meaningful sanctions against the Russian regime that are now producing the impact that we were designed to have. And as you probably know, we're currently discussing the 6th package of sanctions, which will further demonstrate our unity and determination. This 6th package has a clear energy focus. On areas closer to my responsibilities as a Commission, I feel very proud, both as Vice President in charge, but also as a human being and as a European, that our member states in record time, on the 4th of March, just days after the invasion, activated the Temporary Protection Directive for the first time ever in community history, a blanket protection, a sort of humanitarian visa that allowed for the 5 million of Ukrainians who left their house, their homes, and joined us here in our union to have immediate and unconditional access to our job market, to our resident status, to our schools and our hospitals. This was a big moment for Europe, yet another proof that we shall always remain an asylum destination for those who flee war, those who flee persecution. This was Europe at its best. We are now trying to materialize, to transform this temporary protection status in the tangible reality on the ground for the millions of Ukrainian refugees. We are organizing the education of Ukrainian children. We are lucky to have Ukraine as a fully digitalized country with its school curriculum fully digitalized, which allows us to connect our education systems with the Ukrainian systems. We are fast-tracking the validation of all professional qualification from Ukrainian refugees. These people left their homes with just a suitcase. They didn't bring their diplomas or professional qualifications with them, so we're validating on a fast-track procedure all this paperwork that is necessary for them to join in our job markets. We have identified 15,000 hospital beds that will be fully paid by the EU civil protection mechanism for those who require urgent hospital attention across the European Union, so that we can alleviate the burden of the health system in the 4 member states that have common border with Ukraine and have received most numbers. So we are working across the board to make this work. And we also have created, that's important given the huge number of women and children among these 5 million refugees, we have set up a common anti-trafficking action plan under the coordination of the EU anti-trafficking coordinator, just to make sure, ensure awareness and vigilance on the substantial risks of trafficking and abuse that may be involved with such numbers of women and children on our soil. So, let me share with you my belief and the determination of the EU institutions not to accept these moves to rewrite the rules of our international system. The consequences of this war in our security, the broader security architecture, risk being far-reaching. Security not only in military terms, but also on energy security and even food security that may be at stake. We will not let the Putin regime demolish the security architecture that has given our continent peace and stability over many decades. We will not allow this group of people to replace the rule of law by the rule of force and ruthlessness. He should not underestimate our resolve and our unity. We have to stand up for it, we have to invest in it, we have to carry out a fair share of the responsibility, but we will not tolerate the reversal of a rules-based security ecosystem that gave us decades of peace, prosperity, and stability on the continent. Let me finish with a few words on the role of churches and faith-based organizations in the management of the consequences of the war. All over Europe, I'm very proud and happy to see our church communities stepping up to support people who have fled the war. We see fundraising efforts, and we also think that churches and communities of faith have once again demonstrated that above everything they are a force of good. The stance of the Russian Patriarch and his open support for the invasion has caused worldwide dismay to Christians, and not only to Christians. Power politics are back in the agenda, but it is my hope that churches and faith-based organizations, as a matter of principle, will continue defending peace, cooperation, coexistence, and support for the most vulnerable. There is nothing on Christianity that may be interpreted as being compatible to war. Nothing. History is once again accelerating in Europe, and the challenges we're facing are complex and multiple. I fear that we are increasingly moving towards a confrontational, multipolar, uncertain world, very often dominated by transactional relationships. Nevertheless, I have faith in the European Union project. It proved to be the only anchor of stability in this unpredictable and unstable world. A beacon of light in a world that looks increasingly darker. And we will continue to provide political, financial, humanitarian leadership for those needed. The compass of all our determined actions will be that the European Union will continue standing for what defines us: democracy, freedom, fundamental rights, and human rights. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to meet the Ukrainian foreign minister in my office, Minister Kuleba, and I tried to encourage him and transmit the same message I'm transmitting tonight to you. And you know what he told me? He told me, Vice President, don't spend many words. We know. We know and we feel that Europe will continue to be on our side. Let us all hope and let's discuss how this unity can be sustained in the future. Thank you again for having me. Looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much indeed for those introductions. So here at the chapel, one of the things that we like to do is to try to make connections between faith and public and political life, between politics and values. And Vice President SCHINAS, at some point you said to us that, as you see it, Christianity is fundamentally about love. Now, in church last Sunday, we heard that lovely passage in John's Gospel read to us where Jesus gives a new commandment, that you love one another. He says, by this will everyone know that you are my disciples, that you love one another. And so I guess our question this evening is, what does that love look like in a European context? How far can our solidarity go? You know, you mentioned the sanctions that the EU is working towards, for example, on energy. Do you think European governments are willing for their citizens to feel some hardship, to really make sacrifices to support the people of Ukraine?
Well, the sixth sanctions package was designed in a way that was precisely meant to maximize pain or impact, if you like, to the Russian economy, whilst minimizing consequences for us. So it is a package that is a reasonable compromise of what is necessary to create an impact, but at the same time it takes into account, I think, the fundamentals of the European economy and the needs of the European economy, especially in certain member states that are particularly exposed to oil. So, well, welcome to the European Union. You know that the European Union has a unique talent to complicate things that we could have sorted out in a way which is simpler. I would have liked personally to see this package being adopted by ambassadors very quickly after we proposed it to the Commission. It's now a week that ambassadors are inventing or discovering, you can pick the verb you like, arguments not to agree, and there is now a tendency to push it up to the ministers, and we have also European Council coming up on the 30th of May. So I'm saying all this to share with you the belief that we will have an agreement in the sixth package. I would have liked this agreement to be more forthcoming, more clear. Okay, it was not possible, but I'm confident that either the ambassadors tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, or the ministers, and ultimately our prime ministers, will get it done.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
And Vice President Karas, if I can come to you now, you said that we need to sanction Russia with everything in our power. Do you think that these sanctions are making any difference? Do you think that if an agreement can be found on this sixth package, that it will have an effect? Or could we do more? I suppose my question is really, are we being driven here by our values or by our own economic interest?
There are three different questions. Firstly, everybody knows that the sixth package, sanction package, cannot be the last one. And the resolution the European Parliament decided had a very broad list of possibilities we have. And between the list, we know what we came to do, and the political will is sometimes a different. And I cannot accept why Hungary and Prime Minister Orban is blocking at the moment the sixth package. And I am not, at the moment, we are starting in some member states a national communication, also in my country. We are starting a debate like today in Prague, in so-called, we know from the year 2015, the Visegrad states and nations. I think we have to look for a common political will, and it is clear we will have to pay a price. That is not an easy way. And for me, we have to communicate what is necessary, we have to communicate what we have to do, and we have also to show to our citizens what is the consequence if we are not united. If we are not united, if we are not active, Putin's system is the winner, can be the winner. And we have to stay on the side of the citizens of Ukraine, and we can do more than we are doing now. That is, I have to say very clear. To your second question about politics driven by values or economics. Sometimes in the past, we are too much economic oriented and value oriented. To this balance at the moment between the Western countries and Russia, for example, is energy policy. The energy policy and the cooperation with Russia was economic motivated and not values motivated. Values were not on the table of the discussion. And we started this debate a little bit about Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1, but for some of us it was always an economic issue and not a security and defense issue. We need more independence from other systems. We need a stronger Europe in the world, economically, socially, from our defense policy and also from the energy policy, agricultural policy, and so on. That is not against others, but if we are not independent, we are not playing a strong role globally, because we were in the hand of some others, and we can see it at the moment. And we have, that is one of the points of the Conference of the Future of Europe, the unlimited majority must be over. We need a democratization, of the European Union, and we need democratic majorities in the decision-making process of the European Union. It is unacceptable that one country can block our values and our common interests in the world. And your third question is, I have decided to organize in my capacity an Article 17 dialogue seminar on the humanitarian response to the war in Ukraine. This event on the 12th of July will bring together churches, religious associations and communities, and decision makers, experts, MEPs and Vice President SCHINAS to discuss what can we do more, and the main focus must be what we are learning of the refugee problem of Ukraine and how we can learn from our experience and the differences in the experience between 2015 and now.
Thank you. Well, you raise a very interesting point, if I may. Pass the mic back to you, Vice President SCHINAS. The response to the refugee crisis in 2015 and the response now, if we are thinking about European solidarity, I'm sure I'm not the only person in this room who comes from a congregation where there are people from Syria. And I think it's been quite hard actually for Syrians and those from other countries to see the contrast between the EU's welcome of people who have fled Ukraine and the policy towards people who have fled Syria or Afghanistan or other parts of the world. I wonder if you could just help us understand that contrast, and I'd like to ask you whether it's a contrast that you find a challenge yourself as well.
No, let me be very clear on this, and as you can imagine, it's not the first time that this issue has been put to me. I don't see this as a contrast at all. I see it as the result of two situations that have a common denominator, which is people fleeing the war, but all the rest is not the same. In Ukraine, we have a war on our doorstep, and we have 4 member states with common borders with Ukraine. And the people who moved out seeking protection to the European Union, they didn't sort of start perilous journeys from 2 or 3 countries to join us. They simply crossed over from one day to the other. So we had a situation, the Ukraine crisis, that we had to deal with, not on the basis, as some may imply or think, of religion, belief, or skin color, but because of the fundamental objective reasons of the situation developing. In the Syria refugee, when Syria collapsed, let me remind you that that was a slow motion collapse. It was not an apocalyptic war. It was like something that has been happening for months, if not years. And we had migratory movements, of course, that transited mainly through Turkey, Greece. Also there, if I can remind you, Europe stood very firm in our conviction that we shall always be an asylum destination. All Syrian refugees who claimed asylum in European countries obtained asylum protection. And they also remind you that we had 150,000 people stuck as a result of the Syrian collapse, mainly in Greece and Italy. And we have enacted an unprecedented relocation system, which we decided by qualified majority under Luxembourgish presidency, that obliged member states to relocate the asylum seekers, and which you certainly know that has left many open wounds in Europe, because deciding from migration policy of the qualified majority and relocating people of qualified majority is something that is not the simplest politically thing to do. So to cut a long story short, we stood by our values. We protected everyone who flees from war. Asylum we were very generous with asylum on both situations, but it was not exactly the same situation, and the tools that we used for each of the two situations were different, adapted to the particularities. Temporary protection directive for Ukrainians, legal obligatory relocation for Syrians. But the end result was the same, asylum.
Thank you. I think the time is now to open the floor to questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll collect 2 or 3 questions at a time and then invite our distinguished speakers to respond to them. We have a roving radio mic, I think, so if you'd like to ask a question...
This is the roving mic.
This is the roving mic. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and the mic will come to you. Thank you. Please keep your questions short if you can, and make them questions, not comments. That would be great.
Hello, you said Christianity is about love. Maybe having love during war is difficult, but not hating his own enemy is probably the first. My question is direct. How can we help Ukraine not to hate its enemies and avoid nationalism?
I see more hands up. Yes?
I have a question for Vice President SCHINAS. First, thank you very much for the amazing contribution that you're making to the issue. I have also a question, a bit like the Syrians. I'm just back from Jerusalem. I'm doing work on the situation of the city for various organizations. And there, when I was meeting a number of Palestinian people, they always, of course, as you can imagine, insisted on the difference of treatment when they have been occupied for decades by Israel, and they said there's no sanctions by the European Union. And how could you, as I'm supposed to go back there in a couple of days, how can you construct an answer which makes sense and which is really, maybe we learn from the current situation that the values are critical, that maybe it will be a way to go in this direction for other places, and particularly for Jerusalem. I wish very much to have your views and your help also for my discussions in a couple of days on the subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And do we have one more? Yeah, I see.
Thank you very much. I wonder whether you might offer some reflection on the religious dimensions of this war in terms of the role of the Orthodox Church. And I'm particularly thinking of the fact that in your comments you talked about this being a war on Western democratic values. And in an article in the New Statesman, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan William, highlighted this aspect of the war, that this is the Orthodox Church supporting a war that it sees is really protecting the decline in the West of values, citing particularly gay rights and gay pride marches. Similarly, the Pope has spoken out recently in uncompromising terms, condemning it and cancelling his meeting with Patriarch Kirill in Jerusalem next month. And I'm just curious about what you think, how you think that aspect of this war relates to some of the issues you've raised.
Thank you very much. So 3 great questions to be getting on there about values and about the religious dimensions of this war. What hope can we give to the peace process in the Middle East out of what we are learning from this situation, and how can we help Ukraine on the road to reconciliation and reconstruction and a spirit of peace? Okay, I guess this is the only mic we've got up here. I'll come to you. If you could just share some brief thoughts on any of those, please.
The questions to Vice President SCHINAS, I will say 2 points. Firstly, I was in some refugee centers in the Baltic states and in other member states of the European Union where Ukrainian people are. And I cannot feel and I cannot see any hate of Ukrainian refugees against others. There is a strong optimism, there is a strong will to go back. I cannot see any hate of the Ukrainians against others at the moment. That is what my feeling. The second point is, I think the war has no religious dimension. That is more a war against freedom and democracy as against another church or a religious dimension. But the war has an influence because I think the Orthodox Church, the link between Serbia, Orban and Moscow can destabilize the European Union on the West Balkan area, and this connection has also the Orthodox Church in Serbia is an instrument for Moscow's strategy. But I think what I know from other member states, the Orthodox Church in some member states of the European Union, like Austria, is also publicly against the war and also against some interventions and statements by the Orthodox Church in Moscow. And I cannot support or underline some analysis here. In this case, I think the debate is different to the churches. It has political issues and not a religious dimension.
Thank you. And Vice President SCHINAS, if you'd like to come with your comments, please.
Yes, if you allow me, I will follow the order of the questions as put. On how do we deal with nationalism and how do we structure a reconciliation process in Ukraine? I think the reply is easier to the former than to the latter part. How do we deal with nationalism in general? I think by good policy. The best way to defeat extremism, nationalism, hatred, is to produce political solutions that benefit people and people feel it. If we manage to do that, that's much more effective than any ideological debate in a political vacuum about my ideas being better than your ideas and I am this and you are that. I come from a country that 10 years ago has lost 25% of its GDP as a result of a brutal adjustment process. In my country, it was the only country that after such a loss, this did not lead to war, dictatorship or blood. It worked out. Why did it work out? For the very simple reason that the European Union, Greek governments and the Greek people assumed as good policy a program of economic renewal, reforms and restructuring that anchors their country forever in the European Union and the Eurozone. It was good policy that defeated nationalists and populists. Just to give you an example, at the time we had a neo-Nazi party in Greece called Golden Dawn. At the peak of the crisis, Golden Dawn was polling 9% of the national vote. At the end of the crisis, they were polling 0.9% of the national vote. They were defeated, as were the nationalists, as were the ones proposing this speech of hate and and lack of cohesion in society. So to defeat nationalism, Mitterrand used to say, le nationalisme c'est la guerre, it's another form of war. We need to be able to produce good policy. That works. Now in the case of Ukraine, although Othmar is right that we don't detect a huge feeling of hate of the refugees, but let us not fool ourselves that the reconciliation in Ukraine will not be easy. Especially because there is lots of blood that has been spilled, because there have been war crimes, documented war crimes, because there have been losses of innocent civilians, and this takes time to heal. We can of course try and support this settlement process, but it won't be easy. And I said it in my introduction, I think a part of this settlement process has to be cathartic. And the cathartic element of the settlement process is the punishment, the exemplary punishment of all those who are responsible for these heinous war crimes. On the second question, on how do we go about similar or similar in inverted comma situations in other parts of the world, and you mentioned the Middle East. Well, I understand the issue, but also I have some doubts whether the situation in the Middle East is of direct comparison to what we're seeing in Ukraine. Because in the Middle East, we have a problem of non-settlement, and we have the commitment of the State of Israel and international community and the Palestinian authorities to find an agreement. Actually, we have been discussing on a peace settlement in the Middle East for like decades. In Ukraine, we have an independent state that is being invaded because the invader disputes the right of an independent state to exist. This is unprecedented, unthinkable in the international order. Last time it happened was during World War II. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen that. We haven't even seen that in the Balkans, because in the Balkans the situation was different, where different state actors coming out of a state structure. So I'm afraid I have not an easy solution to offer what to tell to your Palestinian friends in Jerusalem, but I would certainly say that this, the need to have settlements based on tolerance, on peace, on interfaith and interreligious cooperation is the only way. And goodwill on both sides also helps, believe me. Now, on the third issue of the Orthodox dimension of this conflict, which, as you can imagine, is relatively close to my heart, I will be also very open. After all, we are at place of God. I mean, we have to speak the truth. The stance of the Orthodox, of the Russian Orthodox Church, and of the Russian Patriarch, Kirill, is not a stance that can be understood or justified by any attempt to attach religious or spiritual criteria to what he says and what he does. He doesn't speak as a religious leader. He speaks as a political leader who uses religion as a way to dress these arguments with some sort of acceptance. And it's so obvious, it's so blatantly obvious. I mean, okay, if you ask for a historical experience also when we had the schism between the West and the East in Christianity in 1054, first we split the empire, and then we had to look for a religious argument that justifies the split. And at the time we found the filioque there. At least they made an effort. Now the Russian Church does not even bother to discover a religion. It's just simply Putin is right. And this cannot be. On the other hand, I happen to be very close to the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew II. Othmar also knows him well. He had the strategic foresight long before the war to declare the Ukrainian Orthodox Church as autocephalous, as independent, which was a brilliant move that, without any attempt to exaggerate, saved Orthodoxy in Ukraine. Because now Orthodox in Ukraine clearly see what is the church that can serve as a shelter, as a refuge, as a force of good, as a spiritual, moral force. And I salute also here the courage of the Archbishop Epiphanos, who is leading this church with resolve. And as a result of what's happening in Ukraine, basically the very powerful Orthodox Russian presence in this country is being evaporating. And there is no Ukrainian left, and how can it be to stay with the Russian Orthodox Church, which simply acts as a mouthpiece of the aggressor?
Thank you very much. I think we've got time for a couple more questions, if you can keep them very short, please. There was a lady here at the front who had her hand up earlier. Did you still have a question?
Good evening. I would like to know whether, following the migration wave, there will be measures, the risk of measures taken, which might hamper or jeopardize the free movement of persons, which, as we all know, is one of the core fundamental freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you. And there was one earlier in the first round, all the way at the front, that didn't get answered. If you could stick your hand up if that was you, and the mic will come to you. You have a burning question, yes?
Good evening. Thank you for being here and being a part of this discussion. My question is regarding Russian oil sanctions. So how can the EU handle and potentially support countries' economies which are reliant on Russian oil, considering the corruption regarding EU funds in these states? I'm mainly referring to Hungary in specific.
Okay, thank you. I think we're just going to stick with two for now, if that's all right, mindful of the time.
There's another one. Let's look. Okay, we'll take this one.
Yeah, we'll take these two. Thank you. So, if I can come to you first, please. So we've had a couple of questions there about sanctions and a question about the impact of the migration waves on freedoms in the EU. So, if you'd like to take either of those, I heard you express rather strong views earlier about Hungary's intransigence on the oil sanctions. What measures could the EU adopt that could support this to be something that the country can actually cope with?
To the migration general, I think migration is a permanent issue, and refugees are a permanent issue in Europe. You can see at the moment we have refugees from Middle East, from Afghanistan, now from Ukraine, and the war in Ukraine will have consequences for Africa and other continents. Hunger is now in the center for many refugees again, and I think it is not a specific issue. We have to react permanently. We can do more as we are doing. The Vice President of the Commission is totally right. The situation is different, but we have to accept two things. We have to accept our common law, the Geneva Convention, our European Humanitarian Convention, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and the international law. And we have to differentiate between refugees and migration. All refugees are migrants. Not all migrants are refugees. But at the moment we are not splitting or differentiate the two things in the public communication. And we need a stronger common European migration and asylum policy. We need a stronger border on the outside of the European Union. And we have to European-size this issue and not to national-size this issue at the moment. And to the second, to the oil, I am very happy that we started to change our policy before the war. Because after the climate change discussion 2019, the Commission and the Parliament decided the Green Deal. The Commission and the Parliament decided to become the European continent as the first CO2 neutral continent, and we have our common goal to change from the fossil energy to the renewable energy. And so we have to do it quicker now, and we need more solidarity inside the European Union. And what the member states asked also Hungary, how we can help you. We need a stronger inside solidarity, and for that we need a stronger European infrastructure. Our infrastructure in the European Union is too much divided and too less a common infrastructure, and that is blocking our internal solidarity. But what we need is the political will to find a common solution and not to block the European Union in the right direction to Russia.
Thank you, Vice President SCHINAS. I'm sure you'd agree with a lot of what your Parliament counterpart has said there. Would you like to add anything?
No, on Hungary I do not. I think we are all very clear. We know what is at stake here. We need to find, as part of the overall solution, something that addresses the specificities of the Hungarian question without shooting ourselves in the foot. It's as simple as that. On the first question, if the question, as I understood it, is will this massive influx of 5 million refugees will somehow jeopardize the freedom of movement that we have all been accustomed to in the European Union? And the answer is very simple: no, it will not. Schengen is the jewel on our crown, together with the euro, the single market, and I would say the Erasmus program. These are the most tangible, visible, symbolic and emblematic successes of the European Union. And we will not allow Schengen, freedom of movement, to be put in doubt. And if you ask me, even in the pandemic, where stupidly many governments thought that by closing internal borders, somehow the virus will stay okay, then I don't cross over, because this also proved not very intelligent. What we are doing now is making clear that Schengen will remain the essence of our freedoms, one of the fundamental components of our way of life, but also we need to be able to modernize Schengen, so instead of closing borders, or rather looking for excuses to close borders, we have first to exhaust all possible measures to address the issues that are of concern: trans-border police cooperation, for example, exchange of information, digitalized databases, knowing where to pick the bad guys rather than indiscriminate closing of borders, and the closing of internal borders should be an ultima ratio, the last possible option once all the rest has been adopted. Final point on the temporary protection directive: it is not yet known that this was a directive, probably Othmar will remember, that we enacted in 2001. And That was done because there was the fear at the time of a massive exodus as a result of the Yugoslavian wars, mainly from Kosovo. But it was never used. Who would have told us in 2001 that 20 years later we would use it for the first time to deal with a massive exodus from the other side?
1992.
Ukraine. It's amazing. It's amazing how the historic accelerator on the continent works. But we were very lucky to have this instrument, and this is an instrument that allowed us to go very quickly.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, but we're out of time for questions. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Let's get a last round, why not?
Okay, you heard the Vice President.
Let's stay at the reception.
Yes, and then we stay at the reception, but let's have a last round.
Okay, last round, but please keep them short if you can. Gentleman at the back, Laura, on your left. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Fergus O'Bear from the European Parliamentary Research Service. I'd like to go back to the Great Schism of 1054.
That's too early.
Metaphorically. Pope John Paul said that Europe needs to breathe with its two lungs, and we're very blessed to have two vice presidents of the institutions who have an insight into both Eastern and Western Christianity. And you talked about the role of faith groups and churches in dealing with the current crisis, humanitarian-wise. But I want you perhaps also to share whether you think there is a role for them in peace and reconciliation, peace building. I think of my own country, Ireland. I think of also South Africa, and what role you might think for the churches there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one more. Yeah, ladies down here at the front, we see you.
Both.
You're very generous. Thank you. Keep them short if you can, please.
Hello, my name is Olga and I'm from Ukraine. And I have a very concrete question regarding the militaries of Azovstal. You all know the history of these soldiers on Azovstal, which were taken yesterday to Donetsk Republic. And so my question is a little bit long, but I want to express it because it's very important for me to hear your opinion. So as far as I understood, this relieving Ukrainian militaries from Azovstal was in order to exchange them for Russian prisoners and stuff. But then today I heard from Russia that they told that they will not exchange those prisoners because they call them Nazi, and that they have to go to criminal as a military criminal to a Russian judgment and so on and so forth. And I have impression, that's only my impression, that it might be used by Russia to ultimate Europe to, I don't know, to release some sanctions or to make some sanctions weaker. And if so, what do you think, what kind of sanctions Europe can make weaker in order to make this exchange possible if Russia will make this ultimatum? So what is the maximum what European institutions could do if this ultimatum takes place? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for both your interventions. I was just wondering, because Mr. Schinas, you said that there is nothing in Christianity which is compatible with war. And in my opinion, European Union is a global project of peace and to promote peace. And I was wondering whether a non-violent response had been considered, and how is it possible? And thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I can come to you first because that last question there was addressed to you, and yeah, what possibility can there be for a non-violent response? And we had a question earlier there about the potential role for churches in searching for peace. And then this question from Olga from Ukraine, accusations of Nazism by Russia. How would the EU respond if Russia holds people hostage to such accusations?
Yes, okay, let's take it from reverse order. The EU is a union based on peace. It's not a military organization. It's not in our treaties. This is how it emerged. It emerged as a peace project. Its birth certificate was the firm conviction of the losers and the winners of World War II that they would never fight again amongst themselves. And to do that, they had this very simple idea to start cooperating on steel and coal, because these were the raw materials that were used to produce arms, to kill themselves. So it was such a brilliant, but such a simple idea to say that if we cooperate with steel and coal, then no one can build weapons against the other. And it worked. It worked. This brilliant idea created the Union as we know it now. But it's not a military organization. We do not have air carriers, we do not have planes, we do not have frigates. But we do have a commonality of purpose, which compels us to be the guarantors of our security. We do that mainly via NATO, but we're also building, and there's a growing awareness for what is now called Revd de la Défense, a Europe of defense. This will not be the result of an apocalypse. There will be no button to push, and this will emerge. It will be a slow process where we will learn from our mistakes, from our difficulties, where we'll put more money on common projects. There is this project of a strategic compass that will lead to a rapid intervention force to prevent the repeat of the situation we witnessed in Kabul airport last summer, where the Americans managed to evacuate all their people with 3,000 Marines, and we had 6 or 7 evacuation missions from Europe competing to each other. So there is scope to move into this Europe of defense, but we're not yet there, let's face it. Now, on Azovstal, the fighters that as of this morning are from Azovstal are with the Russian forces are prisoners of war, and they will have to be treated as prisoners of war. They are covered under the fundamentals of the international law, the Geneva Convention, and I'm personally rather encouraged because the official voice of the Kremlin, Peskov, the government spokesman, clearly is on the record saying that they will be treated as prisoners of war. So on that one, Olga, I probably have a tendency to stick to what the official spokesman says compared to other rumors or fears that I'm sure are circulating.
Today they told very directly in their parliament that...
Who is they?
Russian parliamentarians.
Yeah, but Russian parliamentarians, with all due respect, as members of the European Parliament, have their freedom to say many things, but the government is...
Thank you.
I meant it as a compliment. So for me, this is a fundamental question. I do not think that Russia would be tempted to treat these people differently. Then on peace and reconciliation, I know that you are also very close to this subject and you are researching it academically. Yes, the Irish experience is very promising. I think that the Good Friday Agreement was a success because politics somehow synchronized with a movement between the communities to come together. And this can be a magnificent example that I would like to see also developing in difficult spots of the world, like Cyprus, like Palestine, why not, like the Balkans. Unfortunately, the recent events in Ireland now point to a situation where politicians again are creating problems, not the religious leaders, but let's hope that the church and faith-based organizations can also be crucial in the peace and reconstruction process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Karas. I'm sure you agree with what much of your counterpart in the Commission has said there. As first Vice President of the European Parliament, the final word goes to you in your freedom as an MEP. Is there anything you'd like to add with a brief final thought?
Very shortly to the question of the role of the religions. I think our responsibility for the Article 17 of the interreligious dialogue, I think, must have a stronger role in the general political debate. Without a good cooperation between all churches, without a public debate about the role of the churches for social security and a better respect, we will not have a democratic majority for a stronger European Union. So we have to cooperate stronger with the churches, and the churches has to play their role to unite Europe. They have a strong role to unite the European Union, and the interreligious dialogue is a key for that. And that is why I invited, I explained it before, also the churches to discuss a common project of all churches for the refugees of Ukraine and to help us to solve our general problem, integration problem with migrants and refugees. That is not only the job of the Commission and the Parliament and the politicians. That is a strong relation also between us as politicians with the civil society, and that the churches have a strong role in the civil society. The second point is to you. I saw it in television now, all these statements, what's going on this morning. At the moment, I will say, we cannot accept an ultimatum. And it is impossible at the moment to say we reduce the sanctions. So we have to fight for the international law. And we have to look how we can find a way to bring the Russians back to the international law. It is not the time to accept the policy of the aggressor. We have to defend the people who fight for freedom and peace and democracy and sovereignty. And that is to the other questions. Vice President SCHINAS explained the history of the European Union. But I will say also in this church, Keppel, we have to learn to defend our values. And we have to learn to defend the sovereignty, the freedom, peace, parliamentarism, democracy. We have not to ask permanently the others, they have to do it. We have to learn to defend it internally and externally. And we have to do a lot. To accept the rule of law, to accept the Charter of Fundamental Rights is the basic to defend our values and to defend peace. And we have to support all people in the world who are fighting also for peace and freedom and democracy and parliamentarism. The democracy and the European Union was the answer to the experience with 2 world wars. Our European Union is the answer to anti-Semitism and nationalism. And that is a fight we have to do every day, and not only in the first row where we are sitting. Everybody has to play his own and her own role. That is not an automatism. Please, we have to learn and help us to learn to defend our rules and our values and our democracy stronger in the future as in the past.
Thank you. And ending on that note there about the role of each of us, actually, and we often ask ourselves, what can we do as individuals in the face of such a war? Well, one thing we can do as Christians is pray. And one way to do that is to light a candle. You each received a candle when you came in. If prayer is not your thing, then that's okay. You're invited to light the candle as an act of solidarity with the people of Ukraine. So if you'd just like to, I'd like to invite our distinguished speakers to go first. You each have your candle. And yeah, come forward, please. But you're all invited, you all have a candle, you're all invited to come and bring your candles to the front and to light it.
Thank you very much for your presence. Thank you very much for your gesture of solidarity. Thank you very much, Vice President Karas, Vice President SCHINAS, for this nice exchange. Thank you very much, Reverend Sarah Jane, for moderation. There are small gifts, the small cups, traditional cups of the chapel, filled with the nice Belgian chocolate. So please accept it and drink a coffee every day and be inspired by this small spiritual inscription. Don't tell God you have a big problem, tell your problem you have a big God. Thank you for your questions. If someone would like to know about activities of the chapel, please subscribe to our mailing list or leave your mail downstairs. There is a list. And last but not least, thank you very much for all your donations for the chapel. The chapel runs without any regular donations and is run by the passionate team of people and supported by volunteers and friends. So every donation is most welcome. And now I invite you just to move downstairs and to continue our discussion and to share our friendship. Have a good evening.